Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Agents of Fandom podcast. I am Ryan Cortero. This is probably my first time hosting this podcast. It's a little different here. And I'm here with our trusty, lovable co-host, Adam Blevins. How you doing, man?
I'm doing so great. I mean, first off, you nailed that intro, short, concise, to the
Yeah.
point, but very good right there. But no, I'm so excited to be here with a very special guest who, and your excitement even pales in comparison to mine, which is hard to believe because I've been looking forward to this for like 2 weeks, but I know it doesn't stack up to how excited you are.
Oh man, it's funny that we're both here doing this interview because a lot of our special guest work is things that we both love. And just to list some of them off, there's Netflix's Daredevil, The Defenders, Invincible, the Insomniac Spider-Man games, West Ball's Maze Runner trilogy, and obviously most recently, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. John Paesano, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, we're very we're very excited to have you on again. Like Adam and I are very big fans of a lot of your work. So getting to talk to you and learn a little bit about the inner workings of composing music for all these projects is, very exciting for us.
Yeah. No, I know it's funny as the years go by, you kind of start stacking all these things on top of each other. And it's, you look back and go, oh God, it's amazing that I've been able to be part of so many great, just listening to you guys talk about the projects. It's so easy to kind of get in this bubble and you forget about all the different things you worked on. So yeah, no, it's been it's been an absolute dream to kind of work on all this, all this genre stuff that I just grew up loving as a kid, and to be able to work on it has just been awesome.
Yeah, no, and that's actually where I want to start off with, where a lot of people for the movie, film, TV industry, actors, they talk about like doing auditions for getting their roles. For a composer, what's the onboarding process like? Do you also kind of do an audition? Do you do sampling, or do people reach out to you for some of your music, or is it a mix of both?
It's pretty similar to an actor to a degree. And it has different, as you kind of move through your career, it takes on kind of a different process as you kind of move through, early on in your career. The first thing you're trying to do is you're really trying to prove to people that you can write music to a caliber that could get you into the conversations on a lot of these projects. And so there's a lot of proving oneself, not just with the music, but with the production process, with, being able to deal with some of the politics that are involved, with, working for the studios or working for game developers. And it's a long process. I mean, it's a long learning process for you. I think a lot of composers come into the gig and they always think, oh, if I write great music, I will get jobs. And as you get into the business, you realize writing music is just one part of it. And there's a bunch of other parts, because and as I said, getting jobs takes on a different, it has a different process the further you get through your career. And you get to the hardest part is you get to a certain level and everyone's really good at writing music, right? Whether it's, my score, Henry Jackman's score, or Ramin Djawadi's score, or Daniel Pemberton, or Ludwig Göransson, but everyone can write music. Everyone's really good at doing that side of it. Now there's subjective, some people like this, composer more than that person, and there's music is so subjective and whatnot. But there's no one's writing bad music. I mean, all the music is very professionally done. It's well crafted and blah, blah, blah. So when you're first starting off, you're just trying to get into that mix and trying to prove to people that you belong in that world. When the higher up you get, the harder it gets, because it doesn't become about the music. I mean, the music is still obviously important, and it obviously will, be the most important thing at the end of the day. But there's all these other factors that start working into why certain people get chose for certain jobs. And as much as we all want to believe that it's just because they're the greatest composers in the world, there's a lot of other factors that have nothing to do with writing music that determine that. So to a degree, it's kind of like acting, I believe, like there's there becomes, I think, and I've never acted or never gone down that path, but just from working with directors and working with producers and kind of, you know, being a fly on the wall and listening to how that process runs, I think it's a very similar path for a lot of disciplines, and not just Hollywood, but game development and, you know, a lot of different you know, the arts are like that.
That's so fascinating that you say that too, because it makes complete sense. But in my head, I almost would have thought it would have been the opposite, because when all it takes is one look through your filmography, discography, and you're just like, oh, this guy's surely getting headhunted by everybody. You look through this stuff, and half of the things you've composed, I can just on a whim think of it in my head. So, and it's amazing that you talk about that competition at the top. What kind of relationship do you have with all those other composers like you named? Because it sounds like, even though you are competing for jobs in a sense, that it's not really like a true, oh, I need to get this over Daniel Pemberton, or, oh, I want to get this kind of stuff like that.
I mean, I'm sure all of us have a very healthy level of competitiveness, you know, but it's, you know, it's a marathon. I mean, it really is. Like, being a film composer, it's got such a large learning curve. Just because, I mean, and I can really just speak more educated towards what I do, because I don't, you know the ins and outs of all the different jobs that there are in Hollywood. But composing especially is a very, and also too, you know, there's different types of composers, you know. I'm primarily an orchestral guy. I would say if people define my sound, it's mostly, you know, it's 80% orchestral, 20% hybrid. You know, but I lean heavily on the orchestral, you know, fabric in a lot of my scores, whether it be Spider-Man or whether it would be, listen, even a show like Daredevil. A show like Daredevil still has a very thick undercurrent of orchestral music underneath it. And I would say that's probably one of my least orchestral pieces of work that's out there. Or, you know, Detroit Becomes Human, you know, like Detroit Become Human. I mean, it's all synth. It's not a lot. I mean, there's still a lot of orchestra, but it's mostly a synth dominated, or Mass Effect Andromeda, you know, like one of those scores are very kind of synth heavy. Even Miles Morales kind of leans a little bit more hybrid. But at the end of the day, I'm still kind of, I feel like, more of an orchestral composer. But then there's, you know, 40 years ago, that's kind of all you had was orchestral composers. Now you flash forward to where we are today. It's like electronic musicians, you know, you got guys like Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross out there that are doing incredible hybrid stuff. You have John Williams still writing scores, you know, 94 years plus old, you know, I mean, so you have the gamut of different types of composers. So the aperture has completely widened to who's scoring film these days. So there's so many different types of composers. And, you know, kind of circling back to what your original question was, I got into this because I wanted to be a film composer. And I know that sounds crazy, but my story is like, I feel like it's more of a rarity in Hollywood these days, because I was 9 years old. I saw a Spielberg film called Empire of the Sun. I didn't know how to play an instrument. I didn't know anything about music at all. And I watched that movie and I was so enamored by the film. And the one thing, and it was funny, it wasn't even the music at that point, but I just loved the movie in general. And the one thing you could buy from movies back then, you couldn't get the art from Empire of the Sun, or you couldn't get a behind the scenes featurette to see how the special effects were done, or the only thing you could buy in, I can't remember when that movie was, 1980 something, 83, 84, was the soundtrack, right? It was the only thing you could buy. And you guys are too young to realize this, but back then, you had to wait like a year and a half before that movie popped up somewhere where you could watch it again, like a VHS tape, or you'd have to go to the video store. You guys know the video store?
Oh yeah.
You had to go to the video store to rent the movie, you know, the only thing you could buy was the soundtrack. And I bought that soundtrack. It was a score by John Williams, and I listened to it. And I thought there was this incredible magic trick that you could listen to this music and close your eyes and see that movie again. You could watch it in your head. You remembered the scenes. And I was just so enamored with the concept that music could provide this, tunnel to be able to watch this movie again before this movie came out. And it just really, all of a sudden I was like, I got to learn how to do this. I got to learn how to, and I like just completely reverse engineered my way into trying to become a film composer. So now, again, going back to your original question, I love film scores. I was a fan of this before I ever even got into it, before I could even do it. So I'm constantly buying film scores. I buy every single one of Ludwig's film scores. I buy every single one of Daniel Pemberton's film scores. I listen to them. I study them. Michael Giacchino was like a huge influence on me when I first came to Hollywood. I was sitting here saying I'm primarily an orchestral guy. I feel like Michael was was a composer that was closer in my age to where when I first came to Hollywood, he made me realize like, oh, there is a place for guys who write orchestral film music in modern Hollywood. It wasn't just all rock and roll hybrid for orchestra type stuff. You could still do a classic throwback score and it was still accepted. And so I've always been a huge fan of all the peers that I sometimes find myself up against for different projects and things of that nature. So, but yeah, I mean, it would be, we're all competitive. I'm sure there's a healthy amount of competition going on. It's funny. I feel like I had in my orchestrator, Pete Anthony gave me a great analogy one time about film composers. He said, in Hollywood, you have dogs and cats, right? Your cats are all your musicians, your music people, your copyists, your orchestrators, all the people in like kind of the music side of the business. Your dogs are all your producers, directors, showrunners, game directors, blah, blah, blah. To be a film composer, you have to be a cat that wants to hang out with dogs. And I always thought that was like a great analogy. So I find myself kind of hanging out, as much as I love all my fellow composers, I find myself kind of hanging out more with directors and, producers and people of that nature. So I think a lot of composers are that way because everyone's always like, oh, you're in the music, and whenever, my wife will introduce me to somebody or we'll be out at a party and they'll be, oh, your wife told me you're in the music business. And I always have to be, well, not really. I'm more in the film business. I really kind of consider myself more of the music business is like a completely different business than composers and writing music for film and for games. We're so part of the picture and the project that we aren't out there like, the job of the film composer isn't to create a great album. It's to create a great score that works in a movie or a project. And so I feel like that's the initial job. If we were in the music business, it would be all about just making a great album.
Right.
So they're kind of different industries.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm glad
answer to your short little.
No, I love it.
And we're on your timeline today, so we're happy to chat with you for as long as you want. And I'm so glad too that you brought up working with other people in the industry like directors and producers and stuff, because that's a great segue for the next question, which is about Wes Ball, the director who he worked on all three of the Maze Runner films. He worked on this film, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Wes Ball has directed 4 movies, and you've been the composer on all 4 of his movies. So this one is kind of
actually 4.5.
Oh, is it?
You'd want me to correct you on that. We were so close to doing a film called Mouse Guard.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And then that got kind of got shut down when there was the merger between Disney and 20th. But I know that project's near and dear to his heart. So I always make sure that we always say it's 4.5. Kind of joking.
No, that's very funny. No, you're fine. No, feel free to interrupt me as much or as little as you like. But this is kind of a 2-part question here, because obviously you've worked with Wes on all 4 of his films. So first off, I'd love to know how your relationship has kind of developed since you guys worked together on the first Maze Runner film. And the second part of that is, what on earth is he going to do when it comes time for him if he has to direct a movie without you? How's he going to do it without you?
I won't let him. He has no choice in the matter. It's a great question. And this kind of comes back to the original explanation I gave about sometimes it's more than just about the music, you know? Are there composers out there that could write a great score for all of Wes's projects? Absolutely, you know, like there's plenty of talented people out there that could do it. But the other side of that equation is, what are your influences? What did you guys grow up on? Do you guys, you know, I mean, Wes and I mean, I'm wearing a baseball cap right now. Wes is constantly wearing a cap all the time. You know, we're kind of cut from the same. We grew up on the same stuff. You know, we had similar interest. We have a working style that's compatible with each other. He feels comfortable coming into my room and listening to a piece of music and saying, "No way, man, you blew it on this one. Like, that sounds super cheesy. Throw it out," you know? And I can go into him and be like, "Dude, you need music in this spot right here. Like, you're gonna screw up the scene if you don't have something here." And we have this comfort level that we feel like we can work and go back and forth with each other. And it's been built up over time, you know? And you look at the great director-composer relationships over the course of history, you know, the biggest and most obvious one is Steven Spielberg and John Williams. You know, I mean, are there other composers out there that could Hans Zimmer write a great score for a Steven Spielberg movie? Yeah, I think he could. You know, would it be different? Yeah, but that might be a cool thing. I mean, but there's a working relationship there. You know, Alan Silvestri and Zemeckis. You know, like those guys have done so much, from all the way back to Romance in the Stone, to Back to the Future, to Forrest Gump, to Contact. I mean, that working relationship. Are there other composers out there? Can James Newton Howard write a great score for a Zemeckis film? Absolutely. But the relationship becomes so important. And the reason why it does become important is I'm starting to realize, I think Wes and I are both starting to realize, as you move further in this business and you start working on these huge properties like a Planet of the Apes, not just a big property, but also a huge visual effects film, Wes is so busy during post-production that he doesn't have time to sit there and babysit the score. He has to kind of give me marching orders, tell me what he needs out of me. I can have a brief conversation with him maybe one day in the beginning of the week so I can work. But he's off doing visual effects. He's off doing ADR sessions. He's traveling to New Zealand. He's going to Japan for meetings. He's all over the place. He's going everywhere. He doesn't have time to just like sit with me and like when we first did Maze Runner, it was a very different experience because we were kind of this small film that was over at 20th Century Fox at the time. And it was funny when we were doing the original when we were doing the original Maze Runner film, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was in production. So the studio was so focused on working on Dawn that we were this kind of like little forgotten, you know, $30 million film that was like in the back part of the lot working, and they kind of like left us alone. So we worked on that film, and I had so much access to Wes, and we could work with each other all the time, and we were able to develop this really, you know, great kind of working relationship that evolved over the years. And the experience on Apes had to be completely different because now we weren't the little small film in the back of the lot. We were the big film that all the eyes were on. And Wes was just getting pulled in lots of different directions. And our working style had to, you know, if we didn't have that build up to it, you need, you know, that familiarity with each other becomes so crucial on these big films. So that's why oftentimes you see a lot of composer director relationships really solidify on projects, and you see a lot of, you know, whether it's, you know, now I think it's, you know, Ludwig and Chris Nolan have a great relationship. They've worked with each other on a couple films, you know, and Hans and Denis Villeneuve, you know, they with Dune and the work they did on Blade Runner, and you get these relationships in Hollywood, and it's the same thing in the game world, you know, you know, Bear and God of War and his team, the team that works on God of War, and Brian and I on Spider-Man, and you know, so it's the same thing. There's like the comfort, like I said, if you always remember that everybody's really talented at a certain level, that comfort with each other becomes almost more important than the music, because I think everyone's so talented that we can get the music to where it needs to go. Sometimes some people are faster than others, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, everyone's talented enough to really turn out good scores.
Wow, I love that. I love hearing all that because I have been noticing a lot more like that director composer relationship, and hearing you talk about like how that is so foundational to how a movie gets made, and like that kind of shorthand. I'm sure that you and Wes have at this point now. Like, I'm sure that's been such a big help, especially when taking on like a bigger project like this, like Apes.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's not just music. It's in a lot of the different departments. Wes has a great relationship with Weta and and Eric, who did all the visual effects, and it's every department. Dan Zimmerman, his editor. I mean, Dan's been with Wes since Maze Runner, and we've all worked together as a team. And you see these units that are like, that just become family to a certain degree. You're in the trenches so long with each other, working every single day. And there's, it's like a family, there's squabbling like there is with family members, and there's also great times, but I think at the end of the day, you kind of love these people no matter if you fight with them or not. And I think having the comfort level during such a, making movies and game development and all this stuff, it's stressful, I mean, it's like, it's a lot of eyeballs on you, a lot of money being spent, a lot of pressure. So to be able to kind of go through those trenches with a good, solid team, I think it, at least kind of has like a built-in support that I think a lot of composers and directors and costume designers and editors and everybody all appreciate kind of working in those units.
Right. And one of the cool things about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is like it's one of the more ethical or philosophical movies in the Apes franchise. And I'm curious for you, what is your process like having to make a score for like these big moments where they're talking about these ethical issues about, apes taking over the world and, the not having the need for humans and stuff like that. When you're trying to create that environment, that scene, when you're trying to play out that scene, like what is your mind think of right away when you're trying to compose a score for that?
Yeah, composing the music for Apes in general, it came with a lot of responsibility, and I'll tell you why. Like the Planet of the Apes franchise, the original Planet of the Apes film in 1968 there was a score. It was an Academy Award-winning score by Jerry Goldsmith, one of the film composing all-time greats. And the score that he wrote for that original 1968 film literally broke the mold. It was kind of one of the first mainstream movies where a certain style of composition called serialism was being used, which is a very avant-garde, super out-of-the-box style for a film in 1968. There were some other scores written in the time that were a little bit outside of the box in a similar fashion, but Apes was kind of groundbreaking because it was this kind of a franchise, the start of obviously a big franchise and a big studio, a very mainstream film that was put out there. And so Wes and I, being huge fans of film music and film composers and just the history of Hollywood, and we had the most, utmost respect, not just for the score, but for the film, the original film. And so from our talks from the very beginning, when Wes found out that he was going to be doing Apes, and I found out that I was going to be scoring it, when Wes and I sat down to kind of have initial conversations about music, what we were thinking and directions to take it wasn't a doubt in our mind that we wanted to try to figure out how to bring Jerry's influence from the 1968 film over into, Kingdom. The other thing we really realized, and I'm going to preface this by saying, we're coming off a huge trilogy, right? You have Rise, Dawn, and War. And you're going to hear me refer to War and Dawn in this conversation more than Rise. And by no means do I think Rise to me was an origin story, and it almost feels like a standalone film on its own. And Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is really evolving off of the legacy of Caesar and Caesar was really established as kind of the leader of the Apes, more, I feel like, in Dawn and War. I mean, at the tail end of Rise, he obviously took the mantle, but you really kind of get to see his development and who he became. So I always refer to those films. So we knew we were coming off of these two films as well, Dawn and War, and we knew this fan base was coming over from those films, and they were hugely successful. And Michael Giacchino just created an incredible score for those films. And really, really established kind of a new ape sound for the 21st century. I mean, they really were this, they're iconic scores. I mean, they really are incredible. So Wes and I were dealing with this two-headed monster where, okay, hey, John, we want to honor what Jerry did with the 1968 score, but we also have this fan base, this really intense fan base that's going to be coming into this film. And we want to make sure that they feel acknowledged, that they felt acknowledged, and they felt that we haven't forgotten about why people loved those previous films so much. So we wanted to honor that. So there's a little bit of fan service that we were conscious of as well that we wanted to deal with. And then kind of your original question, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is a very, very different story than War and Dawn. And different lead character. Noah is a young ape. Caesar was this more matured, ape, older, wiser. Noah is a very naive ape living in a small community, doesn't understand what the greater world is, and he's learning. It's another origin story. He's learning of the greater world outside of his village and in the valley beyond. And so they were very, very different movies with different lead characters. So Michael's stuff wasn't like a one-to-one transfer over onto our film. Thank God, because it gave us an opportunity to kind of not have to match that. But as Jerry developed a language for the 1968 film, a musical language, Michael developed a musical language too. So I took it upon myself to learn. It was almost like I had to learn two different languages. I had to learn what the Jerry language was. The Jerry language is very, very technical. It's steeped in a style of modern composition called serialism. And I can get really in the weeds with it, but if you guys aren't, music scholars, it's probably going to go right over your head. So I'm not going to. But it was a very specific language that he developed for that film in 1968. And then Michael had his own language too. So instead of just, taking melodies and different ideas from them, I thought the better idea would be, let me learn these languages and let's try to figure out a way that we can utilize these languages in the film. So the first kind of plan that we came up with, when the film starts off and we're an Eagle Clan and we're kind of introducing our characters to the audience, we thought it would be a great way to slightly let this audience know, use Michael's language to ease them into this new world. We didn't want to jolt them right away with a brand new sound, brand new everything. We wanted to kind of give them a nice runway into this movie and guide them in nice and gently to this new story. And it was a good way because it also helped people not be distracted with trying to absorb a whole new world. And it allowed them visually to see this new world, and they could take music off the plate. They weren't distracted by it. So it was a very conscious move to make sure that, because this is an origin story. We needed people to pay attention. The dialogue was king. We needed to make sure that they were understanding who these characters were. That we needed them to understand what the Eagles meant to them. There was a lot of information in that first act that we really needed the audience to absorb. And the cleaner we could, score has a tendency sometimes to push an audience out of a scene and make them feel like they're sitting in a movie theater watching a movie. And sometimes the absence of score, or the invisibility, let's say, of score, allows the audience to feel like they're sitting there with the characters more intimately and makes them really focus. And Wes was very conscious of making sure that our music wasn't like pushing people out of the way. So we're very light-handed with the music in the beginning of the movies. I don't know if you guys have seen like War and Dawn, but like the music in Dawn and War, it's like dialogue and music are almost like right at the same place. It's a very score forward, at least that's my interpretation of it. It was a very score forward movie. Like, you really feel the music. It's beautiful. It's super emotional. Like, you really connect with the characters with it. But we wanted to be careful of doing that in an origin story because we had so much information that we needed to like set up for the audience. So we did use Michael's language, though, to kind of at least take a stylistic approach so it wasn't distracting, to kind of ease the audience in. Then when Noah leaves, when he goes through the trials and tribulations that forces him to leave, I'm trying not to be spoiler free if people haven't seen it, but he goes through some things in Eagle Village that forces him to leave and explore the, quote unquote, valley beyond, or I like to call it the forbidden zone. I thought it was a great opportunity to transfer into the Jerry Goldsmith world, because now we're going back to this idea of the 1968 film. Noah's in this alien landscape. He's never been there before. And it really just let us open the aperture to that Goldsmith language and to really have fun with it. And there's obviously a couple key scenes out in the valley beyond that we really could dig into that Goldsmith sound and really give longtime fans a little tip of the cap and honor what started this whole entire franchise in the very beginning. And then as we transfer into Proximus's land, that's when we're able to finally we've done enough service now, easing the audience in, that we can start to develop our own sound for the film. And our own sound is still borrowing from those languages that were established before us, but it's just taking it into like a whole new direction. So that was kind of like the overall plan of the score. So it really was thought out. It's not like we just like lined up a bunch of scenes and just started writing to them. We really, Wes and I had a grand plan for how we wanted to do this. And then, which was nice because then we just had to execute it.
I'm glad you brought up to the immersion and crafting music that kind of takes audience deeper into the movie they're watching, as opposed to kind of taking them out of it. And one thing that I noticed so much, especially, I noticed this when I'm watching every movie, but especially in this one where there's so many sound effects and animal noises and so much going on. Like I think about it in the beginning of the film when Noah's first climbing, he's trying to get to his egg. Then it looks like he's going to fall, but he gets up to the top and that he finally makes it. And that kind of comforting score kicks in. It goes from a little more like, oh, intense. Is he going to make it? And then exactly. And all through that process, though, there's so many small noises going off like at all times. So as a composer, what's your approach to kind of incorporating your score into all the other sound? Are these like people on your team that you're working with on a daily basis? Or is this somebody else that you're kind of having to collaborate with? Because it just seems like there's always like so much sound going on in a movie, but the music is what really brings audiences into it. So what's that process like working with sound and like incorporating that with all the sound effects?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's the answer, it's different on every single project. And I'll take you through Apes. Apes was a unique project to work on in that regard. When we worked on this film, you have to remember every single shot in this film more or less is a visual effect shot because it's all apes. The Matt Reeves films were apes living in a human world, right? So you kind of had this mix between some sequences were just all humans on sets acting as their characters and whatnot. And then you'd have scenes that were also apes. They're still, I'm not saying they're like, War and Dawn. It's not like War and Dawn were small visual effects films. They were huge visual effects films. But Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is all apes with a little bit of humans, right?
Mm-hmm. Very little, yeah.
So when I'm working on this film, it's not like I'm working with finished picture. I'm working with humans that are supposed to be apes. And I would write sequences and I thought it would be working great. Oh, it's working great. Wes, check this out. And he would look at it and say, yeah, this is working. And then visual effects would come in. And then all of a sudden, Owen, who played Noah, would turn into Noah with visual effects. And the music didn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. It had this, it was very different writing for music for humans than it was for apes. As crazy as that sounds, but it changed the tone, it changed the feel. His expressions were a little bit different. The emotion was different in his eyes than it was when he was a human. It really changed. And at a certain point, Wes and I had to kind of change our process a little bit, and it started to become more about, let's just start writing what the emotion of the scene is. What is the emotion of the scene? And we had to adopt, in a weird way, we had to kind of adopt this process that how composers used to work, like Jerry Goldsmith did in 1968. Jerry Goldsmith in 1968 didn't have computers and was able to throw up picture whenever he wanted to and just write to it and show the director. I mean, they had ways of working with picture back then. They had moviolas and they could look at film, and they had different, very, very, in our world, they were nothing like what we have today to be able to work with picture. So a lot of those composers back then, whether it was John Williams working on Star Wars in 1977 or Jerry Goldsmith working on Planet of the Apes, and these films that had this kind of like a visual aspect to them, the composers didn't have the luxury to sit there and just write to picture, put markers in their timeline, and do all this stuff that we do today. So in a weird way, I was kind of faced with the same problem. I didn't have the luxury of like being able to write to finish picture on a lot of this stuff. And it's funny, when you look at the soundtrack, you'll see there's a lot of music cues that are 2, 3, 4 minutes long that maybe there's only 20 seconds of it used in the actual movie. I've gotten a lot of people on Twitter. I get a lot of, hey, I noticed on the soundtrack, there's a cue called Caesar's Compassion. Like, I wrote this cue called Caesar's Compassion. It was for when they're by the campfire talking. And then at the end of the day, it got cut out because Wes felt that there was a lot of information, a lot of talking going on in that scene, a lot of important information was being exchanged. He wanted to make sure the audience felt like they were sitting at that campfire with Caesar and Noah. So we tried a couple things and we liked it, and then we took it out, then we put it back in, and then so this film, there's a lot of that going on because I had to just write like a composer would have in 1968 by having conversations with Wes, by reading the script, by looking at production artwork, by using my imagination to maybe what this scene. And the great thing about working with someone like Wes, I always like, Wes to me is like the Mozart of visual effects. Like Wes knew, like Mozart, for instance, could hear music in his head, and he could hear the whole orchestra, you could hear the whole ensemble playing whatever it was. He had this, he's a savant. He had this ability to do that. Wes, in a weird way, in a funny way, he sees these visual effects. He knows exactly what they're going to look like. Even, I'm looking at a person being dragged along on a wheelbarrow, a human, that's supposed to be a horse, and with a, blue background behind them. And Wes sees it all. Wes is like, oh no, they're a horse. There's going to be LAX in the background, blah, there's trees. And like, he knows where it's all going to be. He knows what his finished vision is going to look like. So a lot of the cues were, I had to just kind of write from having those conversations with Wes and trusting what he was directing me to do. And a lot of the score was done that way because we didn't have the luxury of just working with finished picture all the time. So just like we would have in 1968, I wrote the score. There's cues that are, still written to picture, and we deal with sync. But back in the 60s, 70s, they would turn their scores over to a music editor, and a music editor would be on the dub stage on the final mix, and they'd be making slight adjustments, tightening the picture, or making those decisions, like I said, cutting out a piece of music underneath this. We covered a lot of music in the film. And once you get the sound effects in there, the dialogue, the Foley, all the different elements, you watch it back and they go, oh, I think we don't need this cue here anymore. So just like film, music gets cut just like film does. But my job kind of ends when I turn that score over to the music editor and to Wes and the dub engineers. And then they make a lot of decisions on the dub stage of how loud they want the music in the scene, if they want music in the scene anymore now that they're hearing all the sound effects and seeing visual effects and everything. So a lot of decisions are made after I turn that score in. I always joke around and say composers are so lucky because we get a soundtrack. So I'm able to, I can put whatever I want on the soundtrack. So the soundtrack, I gave everybody everything. I gave them. Wes didn't want that cue underneath Caesar's dialogue, or underneath the Caesar's Compassion cue, underneath the conversation with Raka and Noah at the camp. I still put it on the soundtrack because I love that cue, So we're spoiled. Composers are spoiled in that regard. It's not like Dan Zimmerman or Dirk Westerfeld, our editors, could release a movie of what they wanted their exact cut to be. Like they don't get that luxury, but we do as composers. So Wes would always say, "Yeah, the film's mine. You can have the soundtrack." So we that's kind of one of the bonuses we get as composers on these projects. What's funny too, now I'm thinking about it, it's a very similar process for video games. Video games, just like a big visual effects film, we don't have the game fully done. And it's not like I can sit there and write music to gameplay or write music to some of these cinematic scenes that are done. So in a weird way, you have these very technologically forward, I shouldn't say technology, I don't know if that's a word, tech heavy process, whether it's a big visual effects film or a video game, but the music process is very antiquated for them. We have to adopt an older music process to write to them because we don't have the luxury of the visuals to write to all the time on some of these very modern, processes that these projects go through.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because we were actually going to one of the questions that we had talked about. Because for me, as soon as I learned that you had composed the score for the Spider-Man, because that's with Spider-Man and Daredevil are the two for me that just hearing the words, I can immediately play them over and over in my head for hours. I've listened to them for hours, especially Spider-Man. And one of the things that we were wondering about is what it's like composing a score for something that players are, because like when you compose a score for something like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, where a lot of people are going to see the movie one, maybe two times. So and with the score playing, maybe half of it or something. So that's like roughly an hour. But then I'm thinking playing the amount of time that I have played Insomniac Spider-Man games and heard that score in the background, it's like ingrained into 50 years from now. I think I'll be able to still be able to envision it in my head. So is there any kind of different process like that when you're doing something like that as opposed to a movie?
Well, you're kind of talking about themes, like the theme development. Yeah. So listen, I grew up on John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, John Barry, just like a lot of these, let's call it the silver age of film music, 70s, 80s, James Horner, James Newton Howard. And the one thing that those composers had, they didn't have the Brahms that Hans used in Inception or crazy synth sounds or like what separated one composer from the other composer. And it was themes. Like theme writing became the thing. John Williams' themes were different than Jerry Goldsmith's themes, and James Horner's themes separated him from Danny Elfman's theme. You know what I mean? People were themes were extremely, extremely important. A modern idea is, for instance, I can't hum the theme for you to Inception, but if I heard the soundtrack to Inception, I could tell you in a second that that's Inception. So themes don't necessarily have to be like motific ideas. They can still be a texture or a sound or a group of sounds. So I'm not saying one's better than the other. There's still, people always are like, oh, scores aren't thematic anymore. I disagree. I still think scores are very thematic. They're just there's different ways of doing themes. It doesn't always have to be just some like musical melody, the Joker theme in Dark Knight, right? Like, you listen to that sound, oh, boom, that's the Joker. Like everybody knows that. It's just a sound. It's not like it's playing some melody or anything. So there's still ways. But I grew up on these guys who wrote melodies as their themes with the orchestra. And it's always just been a big part of my sound, whether it's, it doesn't have to be orchestra, but it's still melodies, right? Like Daredevil's got a melody to it. It's a melodic theme. Miles Morales has a melody to it. It's a melodic, motific theme. We have themes in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. We have themes in Maze Runner. We have, so I've always, when I sit down and tackle any project, I'm very, very focused on working those themes, getting that theme right, really obsessing on making sure, and it takes a while. I mean, it's, I think Spider-Man you know, it took 3 months to come up with that theme, you know, just like you'd think like a little theme like that, but we went through so many like little iterations, and being such a film composing, you know, being such a film score nerd, I would like start it on the process and think I'd come up with a great theme. And then I would sit back and go like, oh shit, that's Giacchino's theme from, you know, Doctor Strange. You know what I mean? Like you like, but like, so coming up with these themes and trying not to trample on other themes that you grew up listening to, it's a tricky process to come up, you know, to really work these things and come up with something that just feels like it's been there since the beginning of time. And so I've always worked really hard on making sure that any project we have always has a melodic signature to it. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was fun because we got to do more than one, you know, Spider-Man. I mean, we have more than one theme in the Spider-Man for different characters and different things. But we really tackled Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes almost like how John Williams attacked a Star Wars. I mean, not to the extent of, but we have different themes. We have the Eagle Clan theme. We have Noah's theme. We have Proximus's theme. We have the Discovery theme. So we had like different thematic signatures for different characters and different, you know, story ideas throughout the film. You know, Daredevil was more centralized around Daredevil, just like a singular theme. A lot of superhero stuff kind of tends to be that way. We did a very similar thing for, you know, Detroit Becomes Humans got a very distinct theme to it as well, which is more of a modern style. It's more of a kind of a progression than it is an actual like melody, but there still is a melody to it. So I've always been a big fan of melodic, we call them earworms. You know, I want that to, like you were talking about, get into someone's head and not let, you know, have people not have it kind of become part of the fabric of why they like the score. That's what got me into film scoring. I love John Williams. You know what I mean? Like, let's look at all the themes John Williams. I mean, it's like, there's not a day that goes by where I don't bump into a John Williams theme song, you know? So it was just a big influence on me growing up and getting into my composing career. And I just happened to listen to a lot of composers that their bread and butter was writing great themes.
You know, speaking of great themes, I have to talk about it. I know I tweeted it a while back. You know, your Daredevil theme, you know, the main title alone, that's one of the themes that that's one of the intros that people never skip because of that theme. And I remember that was the first like Marvel project on Netflix. I remember watching it and hearing that score, thinking like, oh wow, we have theme music again on like a streaming service, because that's so rare nowadays, right? And so, you know, every time I'd watch those episodes, and even like when I'm not, like that score just kicks in with me. And you know, that's such a beloved score from people who've seen
Daredevil was a really big project for me in my career at that time. You know, I hadn't done a ton. I want to say it was I can't remember if it was post Maze Runner or pre Maze Runner.
So Daredevil 2014, I think
it was probably right around the time Maze Runner.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it was right around that same time. But it was an opportunity to just, it was one of those shows you worked on and you just didn't know how it was going to be received. It was the infancy of Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Marvel property, and Stephen DeKnight, the showrunner of that first season, really didn't do what Marvel wanted to do. You know, like Marvel had such a brand, you know what I mean? It wasn't dark and gritty and bloody and raw and I mean, it was shiny, bright, happy, sunny. You know what I mean? It was so different than what we were doing for Daredevil. And we came into this project, and Steven just told everyone, put the blinders on, listen to what I want you to do, and just do it, you know? And we kind of all did it thinking, and you just didn't know how it was going to be accepted. You were kind of like, are people going to think like this is like, I remember always thinking to myself, like, how the hell is Steven getting away with this? Like, how is like someone in Marvel now like jumping in here and I don't know what maybe he was fighting them off in the background with a stick or whatever. but we were able to really get that vision. He got that vision out, and people just loved it. I mean, I honestly really feel like it was probably one of the first Marvel things coming out of that era that was like, whoa, like this is very, very different for Marvel, you know? And I think Netflix obviously had a lot to do with it too, because it was a Netflix ABC studio kind of Marvel joint thing. And yeah, I mean, it was incredible. Like it just took off. And you know, luckily I got 3 seasons out of it. And I felt like the show just kept getting better and better. It like kept evolving over time. And the season 3 was like one of my all-time faves working on it. The show just got so cinematic. We started off initially, that score started off, it was kind of industrial, like mixed with a little bit of orchestra. And then when we got to season 3, it really started getting cinematic. You know, we really started leaning more into the orchestra. It started getting a little bit more drama, a little bit more weight to it. Eric Olson was the showrunner on season 3 and just did a phenomenal job on it. And I thought we were going to be on, honestly, I thought we were going to be on for the next 15 years. The show is so popular. It was so well received. It was a hugely rated show. And then Marvel, I think, I can't remember what it was, but I think Marvel and Netflix did kind of like a split. Marvel was starting their own streaming service, and I think they wanted to get their IP back for their streaming service. So the show just became a casualty of that and went away. And so, but that show was kind of the first thing that, you know, Maze Runner was a huge movie for me. It was a movie that a lot of kids, a lot of young people loved, you know, not a lot of people that hire me loved, you know, I mean, it's not that they didn't love it. They just didn't see it. It was something their kids saw, you know, but like, it wasn't, Daredevil was something that people who hire me and people that producers and directors in Hollywood and people recognized, you know. Maze Runner, I think a lot of those folks just thought, oh, it's a really popular kids thing that did really well. But like, it didn't like, it's not like people were running out going, oh my God, I got to get the music for Maze Runner. You know, like kids did, which is why you make those shows. They're the most important, you know, that was the audience we were going for. So I gained a ton of fans from Maze Runner, but I created a bunch of, you know, recognition for myself in town from Daredevil, because people that hired me, heads of music or producers of other shows or people like tuned in and saw that show, and it was a well-respected show. So it was a huge show for me, a good growing show for me in my career in that regard. So I have like fond memories of that show. It's like one of my first kids, you know.
You know, and while we're on another question for you, while we're on the Daredevil topic, you know, Charlie Cox he appeared a little bit in No Way Home. We didn't actually get Daredevil Charlie Cox in Spider-Man No Way Home. We got lawyer Charlie Cox for about 2 minutes. But then we've seen him twice since then in She-Hulk and then in Echo earlier this year. And then we obviously know he's getting his own series. But when he did pop up for the first time and she got that episode in She-Hulk, there's a sample of your score in the show. And he's like, I'm Daredevil. And then it's like it kicks in immediately.
Yeah.
So what was that? Is that the kind of thing? Did they ask for your permission? Did they reach out?
No,
to you
I mean, I don't own that music. They own it. I mean, it's when you get hired to work on these, you know, it's like John Williams doesn't own Star Wars. You know, he gets paid every time it gets played, but he doesn't control the music. It's called the publishing. So when you're a composer and you write on these shows, you kind of split the pie with the studio owns the music. They're able to use it and sell it or do whatever they want to with it. The composer is just on the receiving end of the royalty stream if it gets used. So they don't have to give my permission, or they can do whatever they want to with that theme. But I want them to use it as much as they possibly can because I still partake in it. So, and you know, that's it's a huge honor to know that if that character is on, hey, listen, it's like, you know, it's like if Caesar in Planet of the Apes is on screen, we're probably going to use Michael's theme from Planet of the Apes, you know, that he developed for Caesar because it was so wildly popular and became such a part of that character. That's every composer's dream, you know, when it's weird when, like, for me, like, it would be weird to see Luke Skywalker on screen and have a totally different theme for him, you know, like it just becomes part of, and I think every composer that's a dream for every composer, to be able to write something that becomes as important as the character and kind of has to live with it for a time. So I cross my fingers and hope that Daredevil is one of those things that it sticks with that character for as long as he's around.
Well, now that we're there, I mean, they're doing a lot of things with Daredevil Born Again, the new series coming now. Obviously, they're bringing a lot of things back. A lot of actors are coming back. A lot of the characters. Would you be interested in coming back to compose the score for Daredevil Born Again?
100%. I mean, I love that character. I mean, like I said, it's like one of my first kids. Unfortunately, that decision's definitely not up to me. I know I have to be careful. It's funny. The other day, listen, like I told you guys, I was a fan of this stuff. Like I was a huge Daredevil fan as a kid, like comic books. Like I was always into it. Like I loved it. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up working on the gig in the first place. I just had, I knew Steven DeKnight previously from a small thing that he was working on, but him and I just gelled when it came to talking about Daredevil and the original Miller Daredevil and all the different iterations of it. And we had that kind of common love for the character. And the other day they revealed the new Daredevil logo, and I just like on Twitter, I just liked it, oh, awesome, like it looks good, like I liked it, and like before you knew it, there was like this whole conversation going on about like, oh my god, John Paesano is going to come back and score Daredevil, and I was like, oh shit, like I didn't even put two and two together, and I mean, you're always trying to be respectful of Marvel and what their plans are and whatnot, so like you didn't want to, I didn't want to like jump on there and be like, say anything about it. But, it's funny how but it is a question that always comes up. And especially with all the stuff I've been doing for Apes, people ask about it. I would do it in a second. I mean, I love that show. I mean, I love those characters, like I feel like working with, Charlie and Foggy and all the different characters, Vincent D'Onofrio and all those characters from the seasons that I worked with them on is just like, it's like home to me. But again, like I said, that's not my decision. And, I'll tell you one thing, Marvel has a plan, and they always have I would feel very confident whoever they decide to do that show. So yeah, I just really hope the show's successful, and I really want it to kind of continue on because I think the fans deserve it. It's probably a tricky show to try to maneuver, just because it's a different platform. It's a different, there's so much, I don't know if you can make the same show as we did on Netflix. That show on Netflix is pretty intense. It was a pretty intense show. I don't know if you can do the same thing on on a Disney Plus or you know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm just as curious as everyone else is to see where the future of it is headed.
I mean, that future is looking bright, and it would be brighter with you there. That's
okay. I appreciate it.
Yeah, but
I'll let you talk to Kevin Feige about it.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
We'll put in a good word.
Yeah,
Let's give him a call. Yeah.
John, honestly, this was such an amazing. I don't even want to say interview because your insights just into this is just so amazing to hear. Like,
I know, I do talk a lot because, like I said, I'm a fan of it. So, like when I get talking about it, I just like talk and talk and talk and talk. So
I can be a
please. No, please. Like again,
incredible.
Understanding like this industry and like understanding like the composing of it all. Like, there's so many things to learn here about like things getting cut or like the idea that you don't want to have music to take people out of serious moments like that. Like insights like that are just so interesting now to know, and like reviewing different movies, even especially your work, like it's going to feel a little different knowing the behind the scenes process of it. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to like share all of that with us, and we would love to have you back if you're if
absolutely
you're willing.
Yeah. No, once I'm doing the new Daredevil, I'm just joking. No, I mean, I would love to come back. Whatever I work on next, I'll definitely love talking to you guys.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So, before you head out, where can people find you, and what's next for you?
Yeah, I'm on socials now. It's funny, since Kingdom of the Apes, I wasn't on social media, and then when Kingdom of the Planet Apes come out, I'm like, I just got to get out and like be in touch with the fan base on this. So I jump back on social media again, and So yeah, John Paesano is my handle on Twitter and Instagram, and then you can always go to www.johnpaesano.com. So that's where you can find me.
Yes, and make sure to hear all of his tracks, especially the Daredevil one. You never know when that might be relevant again.
Yeah.
But anyways, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Make sure to find us on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Agents of Fandom. You can find us on the podcast platforms, wherever, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, whatever exists. Wherever a podcast is, you will find the Agents of Fandom there. You can find us on our socials down below, Twitter, TikTok, there, Agents Fandom, Instagram, Facebook, Agents of Fandom. And yeah, just stay tuned for all the great stuff that we have cooking up. You can also find my interview with Owen Teague and Kevin Durant, the stars of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, on YouTube. I also wrote the review. You can find it on agentsoffandom.com. We love the Planet of the Apes movie. So again, talking to you about all this stuff is such a dream.
A delight.
No, thanks for having me, guys.
All right. Take care, everyone.